I saw Breaking Dawn Part 2, the final installment in Stephenie Meyer's Twilight series, recently, and you may be surprised to hear that it's not that bad. It's not a very good film, but I would still say that it's the only Twilight movie that is legitimately worth seeing without irony. It's honestly okay. For starters, Breaking Dawn Part 2 is less offensive than the other Twilight movies. The tedious love triangle between Edward, Jacob, and Bella's submissive, obsessive relationship with Edward are pretty much over and done with, meaning that Bella is actually a little sympathetic for the first time in 5 movies. In all of the previous Twilight films, Bella was a horrible character and an awful role model for teenage girls. She derived her entire sense of self-worth from Edward, became suicidal when he left, manipulated Jacob's feelings and strung him along in New Moon, openly flirted with and professed her love for Jacob even after she accepted Edward's proposal, and rushed into marriage with someone with whom she has no chemistry or anything in common, and yet devoted her entire life to. Bella has no ambitions or goals other than marrying her boyfriend, which is a very limiting, degrading lifestyle to instill in young women. But all of that insulting stuff was pretty much finished with in the previous films, and there's hardly any of it in Breaking Dawn Part 2. Bella's motivations in this movie are to save her child's life from people who want to kill her, which is something that anyone can get behind. Saving children is 1,000,000 times better than demeaning women as a dramatic focus. So, Bella is finally sympathetic for once. It took the franchise long enough. I say that Breaking Dawn Part 2 is less offensive than the other Twilight movies because it's still offensive in parts, but in different ways. This may have been intentional to a degree, but it's rather creepy to see that Jacob, having imprinted on Bella's daughter Renesmee, is basically in love with an infant, as Renesmee, despite her rapid physical and mental growth, is less than a year old. There's also something unsettling about how Renesmee will presumably stop aging and become the equivalent of a 17-or-so-year-old woman by the time she turns 7, as it feels like a convenient precedent for sexualizing underage people. We all have secrets that we keep from our parents, but Bella flatly telling her long-suffering father Charlie that there are things that he doesn't need to know is incredibly arrogant and inconsiderate. The film employs a lot of ethnic and cultural stereotypes in its portrayal of the Cullens' friends, especially with the Amazonian coven, and when Bella told Edward that "no one has ever loved anyone more than I love you," my immediate response, out loud, was, "Bullshit." Of course, something being less offensive doesn't necessarily make it good, just not as bad, but please, bear with me. In Breaking Dawn Part 2, the acting from the principal cast is still very wooden, and the romantic moments are laughable, the dialogue is still corny and contrived, and even though the conflict concerns the Volturi confronting the Cullens with the intent to kill them for supposedly turning a child into a vampire, the pacing is frustratingly slow and carries a pronounced lack of tension and urgency. It's also amusing how the Twilight franchise consistently features supporting characters that are more fun, interesting, and better acted than the main cast. I said that this movie was decent, didn't I? The reason that Breaking Dawn Part 2 gets a good rating from me is its climax, which is well directed and pretty damn awesome. You heard me. The confrontation between the Cullens group and the cold, powerful Volturi is quite tense, and Michael Sheen is delightfully campy as the vampire leader Arrow, bringing poise, malice, and a dangerous loopiness to his role. The battle that ensues is a pretty good action scene. It's very dark, frenetic, and intense, and has some good choreography and cool kills. The movie ends with a kind of clever fake-out and is given an underwhelming resolution through use of a deus ex machina, but the suspenseful trial and exciting battle before it are worth the ticket price, even though the rest of the film is a mostly dull, unremarkable journey. Ultimately, for the less offensive content in the plot, Bella finally becoming a sympathetic character, some endearing supporting characters, a conflict you can actually engage with, Michael Sheen as Arrow, and the awesome finale, Breaking Dawn Part 2 earns 3 stars out of 5. Thanks for watching. Cheers.